Welcome, everybody. I'm so glad that commissioners are with us. And if you are joining us from the public, we welcome you to the Gender Equity Commission December 2020 meeting. We're very glad you're with us, even if it is digitally. If you would like to, as a member of the public, participate in today's meeting or have any responses or feedback or would like to share anything with us, we invite you to do that. We think email is probably the easiest way to get a hold of us right now. I'm going to read off our email address, so please feel free at any time to reach out to us via email. It is genderequity@pittsburghpa.gov. And I'll read that again. It's genderequity@pittsburghpa.gov. So please feel free to send us comments, questions. If you're watching this live and you would like to participate or give us feedback during today's meeting, please use that email address. So again, we are here live via Zoom, and we're going to take roll, and then we've got a couple of announcements, and we're going to do things a little differently today. So for the sake of our wonderful secretary who finds roll call helpful, we will do a quick roll call. Commissioner Coffey, are you with us?
Present.
Commissioner Fogarty is here. I saw. There she is. Commissioner Gross.
Here.
Here. Commissioner Hall.
Sorry, it wasn't unmuting. I'm here.
Thanks, Lee. Commissioner Hall is here. Commissioner Hanson is not with us today. Commissioner Higginbotham.
I'm here.
Commissioner Corball.
Here.
Commissioner Manuel.
Present.
Commissioner Nietrauer.
Here.
I see all your waving hands too. Commissioner Overton.
Present.
Commissioner Schultz.
Here.
Commissioner Strelick.
Here.
Commissioner Walker. Didn't see her come on. And Commissioner Williams.
Here.
Always last but never least, Rick. Well,
Thank you.
all right. Anu, do we have any submitted comments from the public that need to be read?
Sorry, we do not. Someone asked me how they watch our live stream, so I will email them back, but no public comments.
Okay, thank you. So before we launch into today's business, I also wanted to take a moment just to acknowledge Lee Fogarty, one of the founding mothers and founding members of our commission. Today is her last meeting with us, and we really can't thank her enough. Lee is part of the group that really had the idea for pulling together a commission in the city of Pittsburgh, and really deserves immense credit, she and all of her colleagues at CDA. But Lee, thank you so much for all of your work over the last 2.5, 3 years plus. You will always be a part of the legacy of this group.
Thank you for that, Jesse. And I've really enjoyed my time here, and we'll miss all of you, but I'm going to be watching you as you go through the next bits of the commission. So I'll be around, but thanks.
Yeah, don't think we're letting you get very far.
It's been an amazing experience, and I hope to continue connections with all of you. So
Yeah, we're actually not going to let her leave very far.
good.
We need her help on lots of things. I'd also like to take just a second to acknowledge this year's executive committee. Today is the last meeting of with this executive committee, and thank you all for your service. I know when this group of officers signed up and agreed to be in leadership positions last year, we had no idea a pandemic was coming, and it's been quite a year for this team. So I just want to thank the officers. We'll be holding elections next month for a new executive team, and this group has really been through the ringer. Everybody has, but I really want to just acknowledge you. So thank you, thank you. That again is Lee and Councilwoman Deb Gross, Sarah Hanson, and Ellison, who stepped in to Kalani Cook's big shoes and really has been doing a great job. Super appreciate all of you. So thank you. And you will shortly be off the hook. You don't have to do any more work. Ha ha, since everybody is really involved in many, many things around here. Okay, so before we go on to the next item on our agenda, which is the consent agenda, I thought that it would be useful just to make sure we're all on the same page and we know how this is going to work. The executive committee had a chance to review some best practices around the consent agenda. So I was just going to review with you how we will try to make this work today. And obviously we can make changes moving forward. But this sort of comes from best practices in the way that consent agendas normally run. So this is a reminder, again, we voted last month to move to this consent agenda format, starting with this meeting. So all of the documentation associated with the items in today's consent agenda were provided to commissioners a week ago. I hope you all got that email. Thank you to Anu for sending that out. That's obviously so that everybody can make an informed vote on everything that is in that consent agenda. And since this is a new process, I just want to make sure that everybody understands how this is going to work. So the executive committee agreed that we would ask all of the committee chairs to submit their committee reports as part of that consent agenda. So all those committee reports were submitted. Thank you, committee chairs. Again, lots of work happening to get all of this in. Everything went into that shared Google folder. Anu was very, very kind to pull that together into a PDF, but the Google folder itself that you all have access to will always have the most updated. So sometimes things got a little updated. The agenda had a couple noodles after it got sent out, or some additional reports I think were submitted. So if you're checking the shared Google folder, you will always find the most updated documents, just FYI. But Anu very kindly sent out a PDF version so you could get everything together. So you will always have an opportunity as commissioners to ask any questions about any of the items in the consent agenda and get those questions answered before we vote. Okay, so any questions and answers also probably should be shared with this full group rather than trying to email, individual committees or email the executive committee. Those should be held, those questions should be asked in our public sessions. After the motion to accept the consent agenda, which actually comes from the chair, so we don't need a separate motion. I can just put the motion on the table that we are going to vote on the consent agenda. Then anybody can ask any questions. These would be brief questions, like clarification kinds of questions. This is not sort of deep discussion, right? The whole point is to move this along so that we don't have, that we don't get bogged down. You'll notice that the consent agenda is now a part of the meeting agenda. So it's listed on our agenda. It actually should be the next thing on your agenda if you're following along. And it lists everything that was in the consent agenda packet. So in a moment, I will ask if anybody has anything that they want to discuss, if they want any of those items pulled from the consent agenda. So if anybody feels like they really need more robust conversation on an item, or if you've got some deep questions or need further discussion, we can pull something out of the consent agenda. It's no problem to do that. The chair will always ask at the beginning. We can put that aside, and then we can move forward with the rest of the items in the consent agenda. Is this all making sense? I see most people are like, some of you I know have done this, but for others, this is a new process. For future meetings, even if we pull, let's say it's a committee report, if a committee report gets pulled out and is discussed, next month that can go back in the consent agenda, right? So if you're pulling something out for discussion this month, that doesn't mean it's always pulled out. We can put that back in next month. And it's really important if somebody feels uncomfortable with an item, the consent agenda is not here to like force through a vote on things, right? Any commissioner can pull anything out of the consent agenda. It is not a vehicle for ramming the vote through. This is merely really to free up time. And after today, we won't have all this conversation about how it works, and we'll have even more time for conversation in our meetings. But I just wanted to make sure everybody knows we have to have full consensus of the group so that the consent agenda is not here to make people feel uncomfortable. Okay, just a couple more notes. If we remove any items, the chair then has to read aloud the remaining consent items and move to adopt the consent agenda as a whole. So it's not actually necessary for us to take a vote on the consent agenda. Instead, once the chair, so I'll be making the motion to adopt, and we've had time for any of those quick questions, the agenda will be approved pending the absence of any objections. Okay, they'll be looking, I'll ask if there are any objections, and then it will be accepted and we'll move on. So we don't have to take a formal vote. Everybody following this so far? We're all good, all right, excellent. And last but not least, really important, and this falls on Allison, our secretary will include In our meeting minutes, the full text of all the resolutions and reports that were approved as part of the consent agenda. So all of that will be in our minutes, even though they were not reviewed during the meeting, but since you all did that individually ahead of time. So Allison will make sure that all of the documents and any resolutions, any of that good stuff are in our meetings, in our minutes. Okay, are we ready to try out a consent agenda of 2020? So we start by asking, does anybody want to discuss any of the items listed under number 3 in your agenda, under the consent agenda? Is there anything we need to remove for additional discussion? Amanda.
Just one quick question about the executive director's report. I wasn't sure.
Question?
Am I muted?
Wait, I can hear you. Is it a quick clarifying question, or is it something that do you want to pull it out and have a robust conversation?
So, okay, maybe I'm missing something. So under the consent agenda sheet that was shared, I noticed that the executive director's report was listed under one of the pieces that basically we read ahead of time and we don't have to have conversation on it. Is that correct?
But you can ask clarifying questions.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That was what thank you.
Yeah. So if it's a short clarifying, that's perfectly fine. See, we're working now. We're figuring out how this works. So if you have a short clarifying question or just a short, that just requires a short discussion, we can motion to put the consent agenda on the table. Then you can ask all these, sort of short questions, and then we can move, we can actually accept the full agenda. So what we're doing right now, and thank you, Amanda, this is helpful for all of us to understand how this is going to work. What we're doing now is asking, does anybody have a item in the consent agenda that they feel needs to be removed and discussed separately? This would be like, I'm really uncomfortable with something. I need this taken out. We need to have a full conversation. Does that make sense? Okay. Anybody have an item like that? Go ahead, Amanda.
One more clarifying question.
Sure.
In the event that the ED's report is part of those, the general things that we hear every single month that we don't vote on, will Anu be presenting anything on the agenda, or will it only be if somebody has a clarifying question? So will it basically remove her from the agenda is what I'm asking.
Right. We could, I think the answer, Amanda, is yes, to the extent that we won't be going through every item in the report, just as we won't be going through every committee report, just as we won't be going through the treasurer's, all of those things. Short questions obviously can be answered, so clarified at the time that we're voting on the consent agenda. But if we've got other things that we want to talk about, it will open up the rest of the agenda under new business. We can bring up questions. We can hopefully have more time for this sort of appreciative conversation. So there should be plenty of time to ask a new questions, for instance, or does that make sense? But the idea really is that the reports should stand on their own with some quick clarifying questions, and then we could have additional conversation. Allison?
I've seen kind of a hybrid model of that. While the ED's report is part of the consent agenda, I mean, it would be up to us to decide, do we want to ask Anu to pull one particular item of note to present to us every month or every meeting? I mean, we could do that as well. I mean, like I said, it's kind of a hybrid of the consent agenda. We can still ask the questions, to your point, Jesse, in new business about other things, but maybe ask her to present on one item, not a long presentation, just, I mean, we could do that as well. Something to think about.
And obviously this is a practice run, right? We're just working out the kinks for how this works and how we want it to work. I think that it's one of the beautiful things about our conversation about moving to Martha's Rules and some other ways of doing business together is, let's figure out what works for us. And Allison has seen this in practice. I think Sabrina mentioned that she's seen this in practice. So we have some experts with us. All right, so did I miss anybody wanting to take something off out of the consent agenda? Okay, so here's how I believe it works next. Then I read to you what's in the consent agenda so that we read this into the minutes. We know that in the consent agenda, this is what we are now moving to accept as a group. The November meeting minutes from our working session and the public meetings are both in there. The treasurer's report, and then from the committees, we have a number of reports. The executive committee has a report. The executive committee also included the consent agenda best practices included in that folder, and the technology needs assessment document. The governance and leadership committee report is in there. There's a report from the equity action planning committee. There's a report from the gender analysis committee and an overview of the CBPR project, including a timeline. All of that was included. There's a report from the workforce equity committee, and there's the executive director's report. So the motion is now to accept this consent agenda as a group. And then what I do is I say, barring any objections, anybody object? I see nobody shaking their head or raising their hand. We consider that consent agenda accepted. Wow, that was easy-ish. Easy-ish. It'll get easier. How's that? But that was how that would work. That should streamline things a bit for us. Hopefully that felt okay to all of you. It does mean that we have a lot of reading to do together or individually before each meeting, for sure. So that on our agenda puts us at number 4, old business and continuing discussion. So this would be where, Amanda, to your point, if you had a question that you wanted to pull out, we could put it right here under number 4 immediately to have conversation space. So I think this might also be a spot where we could ask some longer, broader follow-up conversation questions about the executive director's report if we want to do that. So number 4, old business, continuing discussion. We had no items that we pulled out, but we did have a couple of things that were holdovers from last month's business, including the proposed bylaws change. So Sabrina, I believe you were the one who had put this on the table, so I feel like I should come back to you since we gave notice that we were going to make a change to the bylaws.
Yeah, sorry. I think I'm caught off guard a little bit. Hold on.
You had put it on the table, and I know the motion was yours, so I didn't want to take the floor from you since you had the motion to change the wording of the bylaw.
Oh, from Robert's rules to Martha's rules, right? So that we had discussed it last week or last meeting, and we put the motion out there last time, and we had to advertise if that's what we wanted to do 30 days prior. So this would be the timing or the appropriate time for the commission to vote on that if that is the change that we would like to make. So I'd like to take my motion off the table where it was last time, and so move that we make the official change in the bylaws from using Robert's Rules of Order to Martha's Rules, as was recommended by several commissioners after much discussion and helpful information that was provided to the group to read about it. So I don't know if there's a second, but.
I'll second.
And then if there's any discussion.
Can I ask just a housekeeping question? So who will make that change to the bylaws and ensure that, so I don't think I have a copy of updated bylaws, so I don't know who's in charge of those because that's a commissioner responsibility. So I just want to make sure that if this gets approved, there's someone responsible making the changes and then making sure we know where they are.
Yeah, thank you for asking. You jumped ahead of me. I was about to say, I believe that is our secretary's responsibility. So I was going to make sure that Allison had access to that document, and it is in our shared Google folder. I can certainly help if need be, if we vote to make this change. And I see Allison nodding kind of, okay. So I believe in rereading our bylaws that responsibility falls on us anew. In other words, not on you to make that update that document. Sabrina, I think last time, since the motion's now on the table, it's been seconded. I just had a quick question. I believe last time somebody had the suggestion that perhaps rather than specifying Martha's rules, that we could open up the language and what it says right now under section 7, I copied it down here, is Robert's Rules of Order. Meetings will be held according to Robert's Rules of Order. Subject to the following exemptions, actions of the commission require a majority of the members present. I think somebody had suggested.
I did.
Lee, was that you?
Yeah, that was me. I suggested that we leave it as we have rules of procedure that have been accepted by the commission, so we don't have to keep changing them. And also, I think once you all look at some of the job changes or the suggestions for commissioner and committee chair changes, that there are going to be other changes to the bylaws. So I wonder if you want to do that now or wait to put all of them in together.
I think that's a really great suggestion from Lee. I mean, I've not asked for time. There will be separate time in the meeting when we talk about the work of looking at the role of commissioners and all the work that Lee has put into that and where we go with that. But it might be helpful to do that all at one time, not only for Allison. We do have a bylaws committee that Lee, Amanda, Michael and myself sat on in the very beginning too. So I would think if we need assistance with that, we can go back to our committee. And one more reason I can object to Lee not being participating.
Thanks.
But yeah, we could help with that as well, I'm sure.
Allison?
So, I mean, I don't know if anybody's done this before, but generally, I mean, my typical experience has been that there's an ad hoc committee, a bylaws committee, as you were talking about, Sabrina, like to really look at the bylaws, talk about potential changes, bring that to the group, discuss that, vote on it. And then to your point, Sabrina, it makes sense to change everything at one time. So then we can note, bylaws amended on such and such a date. Does that make?
Yeah, I mean, actually, sort of thinking along the lines of what the commission has discussed in terms of, we wrote those bylaws at the very beginning of the start of the commission because we had nothing, right? So we met as a group, we proposed them to the commission, we worked through them as a group, and now it's several years later, and this might be a chance for the committee to come back together and say, oh, hey, in addition to the roles of the commissioner and the change to whatever procedural process we're going to use during meetings, we also thought of this and this and this, right? So I think that is a really good suggestion. I think that committee could come back together.
Yeah, and I've been looking at the bylaws because we were looking at the changes in executive committee, and I think there are a number of things we could fine tune. So I think that's a really good idea for you all to look at that and see where we want to go with it. Plus, once we start making them, you have to change other things along the way, even if it's just grammar. So.
I believe we actually required of ourselves a regular review of the bylaws. So we're due in 2021 for a bylaw review.
Perfect timing then. Wonderful.
Let's open the question of whether or not we're going to vote now. We do have a motion on the table. Are we going to vote now to make this particular change about how we want to run our meetings? This does impact, obviously, how we would be able to run January's meeting, for instance. If we choose to have a meeting in January, just depending on what we decide with that. But we had talked about using Martha's rules as a way of, again, opening up space for a little bit more conversation. So we have a motion on the table. Sabrina made the motion. Sabrina can choose to remove that motion off, or we can move forward with the vote.
I mean, in light of the discussion, I don't have an objection to pulling the motion off of the table. I just don't want that to affect how our executive committee and our commission feels that they want to go forward with January's meeting. So I do feel like that we have been helpful to each other with procedure and have tried to support each other. I think that I'm curious if there's anyone that would object, but if we put this as a review of the bylaws, that might be the better place to set it for the moment. knowing that that is the goal of the commission to adjust the meeting procedure that we follow.
So Sabrina, are you withdrawing
Yeah, I can withdraw.
that particular motion? It sounds like you were leading perhaps to a revised motion, which is to pull the bylaws ad hoc committee back together.
Yeah, motion to get the band back together. That's we had such a good time the first time when we were doing that, right? So, but yeah, I would, I do. I would like to motion that we have scheduled a meeting for the bylaws committee to do a review of the bylaws, and I actually would suggest that we schedule that meeting after the January meeting, because we have some real work to do in the January meeting that Lee is going to be generous and gracious with her time and come back and help us with that work, because she's done so much so far. So I don't know that it makes the best decision to do it prior to that work. So in terms of a time frame, while I'm motioning that we have that meeting, it would not be until after our January meeting of the commission. Although we've had some discussion about how those meetings are going to happen in the new year as well. So in summary, I am motioning that the bylaws committee meet again to review the bylaws, but not until after the January regular commission meeting.
Thank you for that. Excellent. Is there a second of that motion?
I mean, do we need to be specific, or can it be just to convene the bylaws committee to conduct a bylaws review in calendar year 2021? Or just to, I mean, as opposed to saying that has to be after the January meeting?
Yeah, I don't think it needs to be specific. I just didn't want anyone to think that we were coming to the January meeting with having met and having all these proposals. I wanted to be clear about that.
Is there a second for Sabrina's motion? And then we could have some conversation. Lee is seconding that motion. I just wanted to clarify who is going to be on the bylaws committee this go round. We had, this was an ad hoc committee that had formed and dissolved. So we do not have sort of a standing bylaws committee, right? I welcome back those of you who served in that capacity the first time around, but I don't think anybody should feel required to do so again. But I would love to have you. So as my memory served, Amanda, you were on that. Mike, you were on that. Sabrina, you were. Who else?
It was Sabrina and Lee, myself and Lee.
And
Michael chaired that committee, if I remember correctly. Not to put him on the spot there, but I do recall.
Yes.
Michael, should I write that?
I think that's what he just said. Yes, I will do that. I don't
we also have new members with us. So I do want to invite new folks who might be interested in serving in this capacity on this ad hoc committee. It's ad hoc, pulled together just for the purposes of this. I don't anticipate this being a group that's going to have to meet every month next year. But do any other folks wish to join the bylaws group? We'd love to have you.
I'm happy to join.
Thank you, Jaleesa. Anybody else feel their heart moved in this direction? Okay. Or their feet or their minds or anything else? Okay. Then let's have that group. Mike, are you willing to pull that group together in 2021? Is this something I don't want to?
Honestly, no. And just because of my general hatred for Zoom and Teams and Google Meets. We can all get in a room together. Yeah, I'll volunteer then.
You'll volunteer to be on it, but not to lead the charge. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I can't coordinate online calendars with new technology. I'm an old man. I can't handle it.
Is there somebody else from the group willing to chair this bylaws ad hoc committee meeting so that we know it's got leadership?
I mean, I I don't know who's jumping in here. I can't chair it, but I think if we get a meeting date scheduled, like I think the last time we worked as a group really well. So I don't know if that helps things, but I certainly could like try and find a date that works for everybody.
I think that's the most important thing right now.
So just for clarity, can I ask who's on it again? Amanda, Mike, Sabrina, Jaleesa? Am I missing someone?
That's correct. And Lee had been. That was the other
And
person.
Lee's not leaving, really, so she'll be on it again?
Lee is leaving.
That was part of my motion, I believe.
We super glued her to the Zoom call. She can't go anywhere. Okay, thank you for that clarifying discussion of that. So we do have the motion. The motion's been seconded. Can I call that motion to vote, please? All in favor of having the Martha's Rules now is going to be part of this bylaws review. So we would not be using Martha's Rules in January.
Well, and remember,
Oh, Lee, you're muted.
didn't stay on. Remember, we're not changing it to Martha's Rules. We're changing it to there will be rules of procedure. So it's not that important that we do that immediately. Where because we really were only using Robert's Rules when we had to, do some discussing, and it was pretty informal anyway. So it's not going to be Martha's Rules. It's going to be rules of procedure.
Right, but we won't be making that shift in January. In other words, we will continue using the modified Roberts rules that we have been using. We're using them right now, for instance.
Right.
In January.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the motion on the table then is to convene the bylaws committee to review not only this suggested change to the parliamentary procedures, but also to take a look at the rest of the document and make sure that we adopt all of the changes at once. All in favor of pulling the bylaws committee together? Please wave or nod or do something beautiful. Thank you.
Hi.
Anyone opposed? Anyone abstaining? All right. Thank you, bylaws committee. I appreciate your willingness to step forward again and serve in that capacity. And thank you, Jaleesa, for joining that crew. And Sabrina, thank you too for offering to get the date organized. That's the hardest part, right, is organizing. And Mike's honesty about how hard it is to organize these things. Appreciate that. It is, it's really it's a pain. Okay, that was the last piece of business that we had held over from last month. Moving on, we did set aside some time for discussion around the Equity Action Planning Committee, not knowing whether or not we needed to vote on anything. Morgan, I don't know that the committee's got anything to lead us forward with more discussion. Well, the time is yours if you'd like it.
No, I think that the general consensus was that we just need more discussion in general about discussions and how those processes are fulfilled. We've rescinded any vote for CMU to partner with us, just so we can all recalibrate and determine the best way to operationalize the work of this committee. It's a hefty job to take on, looking at operations within city departments and working in partnership with them. So I think it's best for all of us to kind of move with intention. So that is the general update. There aren't any action items.
Great. Thank you again, everybody, for your conversation in the last hour. That had been really the bulk of the time that we'd set aside and the executive committee had put on the agenda. We did also put some time on here for other committee requests. I'm not sure if any of the other committees had voting items or discussion items. Everybody had beautiful reports, by the way. Thank you. I hope everybody read those gorgeous reports that were in the consent agenda. The only sad thing about not having the committee's report in public session is you don't all get to, enjoy everybody's faces delightfully following along as you read them. Are there any other committee requests, anything that we need to have some discussion time? Sabrina?
So just in conjunction with what I was talking about, like to request that there be time set aside for a working session in our January meeting, if we're meeting as normal in January, for Lee to present the work that she's done on the roles of the commissioners, and for the commission to review that, make suggestions, work on discussion items during the first hour of that meeting. We had originally planned to do that this month, but we had other topics that needed attention. So Lee has agreed to come back and do that work with us, which I'm very thankful for. But I'd like that to be the first hour of our meeting in January.
Sabrina, is that a request for a working session, for the hour-long working session?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for clarifying. And to my knowledge, we had no other requests for the use of that time, other than the fact that we just had some general conversation about potentially giving ourselves a way to have a break. That might actually be a good segue into a small conversation now. We can do that if you wish to have some conversation about how we might want to acknowledge the pandemic. As Jaleesa was reminding us in our previous hour together, is there a way for us to think about how we want to spend our time together? The Governance and Leadership Development Committee has put a slate of candidates together, so we do have important business that we normally would conduct at the top of the January hour in public session, which would, of course, would be elections. So I want to remind us that we have that, but we also need to take care of ourselves and each other. So I would welcome your thoughts on, and we have this recommendation from Sabrina's group to use that working session hour to have this conversation about commissioner roles and responsibilities. So before we run down that path of just do, let's make sure we are checking in with each other right now and being very intentional about how we do want to use our time in January, and do we want to take a break? Sharon, I see your hand.
Given certainly Jaleesa's reminder, my first instinct was no. My second instinct is usually always better than my first. I would vote to take a break. I think at some point, if we don't stop it, it will run us. And what I was thinking about is, as Morgan and Jaleesa were talking, I don't know about you folks, but when I'm under it, as we all are, some things go out the window. And so it's really time to, just to stop and to breathe and to, remember, not remember, but remember ourselves to who we are, and not what we're in, but to who we are. So I really vote for, honoring our humanity and also honoring our weakness, that we can't do it all. And I shouldn't say that's not weak, that we can't do it all. And that I love that. I think it was you, Jaleesa, or maybe it was Amanda. I don't know who it was, but, or Morgan. It was rest is, what did you say, radical?
Rest is radical.
Rest is radical. And that hit me, so I hear you. And so I'd like to, I would say yes to that.
I saw
and it's resistance, it's resistance from the push. So.
Janet?
So I'm all for, taking a breather, but this is also a question. If we take a breather in January, how does that impact the fact that we have our executive committee elections that we have to do in January? I would propose that we still conduct the meeting in January and take the month of February. It's Valentine's, it's love month, right? And love on ourselves by taking a rest break in February, but do at least get something out of the way in January, because that's what we have to do. And then take a break in February.
Can also be a very short meeting. I saw Lee's hand and Deb's.
Okay, after Janet spoke, I only said, I was going to say, one of these months is a good time to take it because you're going to be having the retreat, half of the retreat in January and probably half in February. So you'll already be meeting, and I don't know if you can, make that a meeting. You do a little bit of business for a few minutes, whether that can be a meeting. So think about that.
Deb?
Thank you. So I've been wondering, and I don't have the exact answer here, but the city is under emergency powers, and it may actually absolve us from our commitment. So it's something we can look at with Mike. We have been since March, and it's a legislative thing that council has been renewing. So it does absolve. There's some procedures things. We could just follow up and check on that. Maybe Mike and Janet can help, and Rick can help us follow up on that.
That would be great.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking right at Mike. He's very good with the details and logistics. Will you get back to us about that?
See, there's language in the legislation that we've been voting on and renewing kind of monthly, but it's just not coming back to me right now. But I suspect because there are some things that it just believes it's an extraordinary time.
Maybe.
And so
I'll have
across
to look it up. The
departments.
city hasn't done anything with that powers of emergency since March. So it exists.
No, we've been renewing it, Mike.
Yeah, right, but we haven't enforced anybody or enforced anything on it. Makes me wonder why we're still renewing it.
Oh, I think procurement is probably doing some different things, but anyway, we could. I just meant to take that offline so we can look at it and see if that's a possibility, that we don't have to do anything else about it.
Thank you for following up on that. It would be great to know what sort of our legal obligations are and whatever kind of wiggle room. And remember, a couple people have suggested we could also have a very short meeting. We could have our working session and then just a very short electing of officers and adjourn, or electing of officers, consent agenda adjourn, right? It could be something fairly short. Amanda, I saw your hand.
Thank you, Jesse. So I just wanted to say I do hear that people want a break, like a full break. And it sounds like there are a few things that are, I guess, urgent. So my suggestion is maybe we choose which month we take care of those urgent things, and then we dedicate that next month to being a full break, like not a short meeting, not a nothing. That's my suggestion, is we figure out maybe so that we can honor the fact that people are tired, and also honor the fact that there are some things we want to make sure we take care of, so that when we go back to doing the work, we can just kind of do the work. So maybe it would be helpful for us to consider what all we want to make sure is kind of done early on. So we have the retreat, we have elections, we have, the bylaws stuff. It sounds to me like those are the next pieces. Maybe we can think about which month we want to do that or prepare that for, and then maybe dedicate that other month to a full break so that people don't have to think about showing up even for a short period of time.
So I agree with you, Amanda, and I want to be respectful of Lee's time too, because she's offered to come back. So this is not an effort to put you on the spot, Lee, but wanting to make sure that whether it's January or February, that you're available.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty flexible at this point.
Okay.
Not traveling.
Okay, great. Thank you.
So whatever works. And it's sounding like January may be a better one. Everybody's tired right now, sounds like, so.
Well, I'm hearing two things. I think Amanda just summarized that well, right? We have some important business, including officer elections, which we are supposed to hold in January. We do have this open question, and Deb, thank you for helping, and Mike, everybody for helping us figure out what our wiggle room might be. And we want to operate with accountability and transparency there, but also acknowledging that we're all operating, in a pandemic. We also want to make sure that we have a chance to welcome our new officers and let them take their seats. And so I'm not sure I've heard, I don't feel like we're settled on this question. We've got perhaps a quick working session in January and a quick meeting and then a full break in February, if we're able to do that. Janet's going, I see Janet, okay.
Yeah, I think that's what, people are kind of saying. I think that, we cover what we need to cover. And then maybe even in that meeting, offer some mindfulness, some wellness on the second half of that. And then take the full break in February. Get all the business done and then let us just kind of relax a little bit. So.
Since health and wellness is in my purview, I can always tap into my team and see what information they can share with us in the month of January from a health and wellness, just from a mindfulness standpoint, and just share that with the group.
And that's where I got it from, participating in the wellness activities for the city. I was never really into this stuff, but it really works.
Janet, I'm happy, if you don't have any luck there, I'm happy to facilitate a mindfulness exercise or breathing exercise.
Thank you.
Yeah, I won't have a problem, Sharon, because they all report to me.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Janet, and to Sharon for volunteering.
I get that. I like that.
All right, so the plan I'm hearing, just to summarize, and I want to make sure we have time to, we have actually 2 action requests. I want to make sure we give Lee some time to present both of those. We will have our working session in January. Am I hearing that correctly? We'll do our roles and discussion in January, followed by a public session, but we won't have a whole lot of business other than electing officers, and we'll do some mindfulness and wellness work that Janet's going to help get us somebody to lead. Thank you, Janet. That will allow our new executive committee to get seated and proceed, which I think is important business. Appreciate that. I don't imagine our committees are going to be doing a lot of work in the next couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So I suspect we're not going to have major committee reports or major things. I hope the committees are taking the next few weeks off. Let me put it that way. You all deserve that. It's been a very, very busy fall. So I expect that would be a good order of operations. Thank you for that discussion. I do want to move us on to number 5, new business and action requests, so that we can give Lee an opportunity to present. I know you've got 2 things you wanted us to think about.
Well, actually, the first one we sort of missed our ability to sign on. It was called a blast to the hill, suggesting a letter to leaders of the House and Senate and the Senate Judiciary Committee that they do not restrict funding for victims of violence, and we sort of missed out on that. That came the day after we met last time, so we couldn't sign into this. But that's something that with the new executive committee coming in is to really look at how to do this, because a lot of these things come in with very short time limits, and usually there are things that we would support. So are there other ways that we pass this without having to wait for it to come to a meeting? The way that we pass this is signing on to the ERA Coalition's letter to Biden and his administration that they look at the ERA within the first 100 days so that we can have in our country, an equal rights amendment, which we've been waiting for many years. So if you have any questions about that, the ERA Coalition is a group that the ERA with all of the provisions that would be appropriate. And they have brought in a whole bunch of other groups now who have been supporting it. And they're groups that we would all join. I sent you the letter where it had which groups had already signed up for it. Cities for CETA has, Pittsburgh for CETA signed up. Zonta has signed up, and most of the major, what kind of power will it have? I don't know, but it feels like our name could be on something that is, standing up for women and for the things that we want to stand up for. So it would just be saying we were signing on to their letter. And so Mike made a motion for that, and I don't know if we want a second or if you want some discussion.
Yeah, Lee, sorry, you're breaking up, but I heard you make a motion, and I see Janet second on that motion.
Second, okay.
Thank you, Janet.
Any questions?
Questions for Lee? And we appreciate you bringing this forward. And just to remind everybody, we do have an advocacy request process, particularly if you're new and you haven't seen this at work. Lee is absolutely correct that a lot of these things are timely and need an answer quickly. I'm awfully sorry about the Victims of Crime Act. I know you brought that forward, and we thought that there was time, that the timeliness of it could wait until this commission met. The preference that the commission had discussed was that we would prefer to have everybody have a chance to hear about these things and have some discussion and vote. But if there's something that just can't wait because there's a deadline, and that is often what we're finding, often the case, we do have a mechanism in place in that advocacy request process for the executive committee to lead if it needs a vote. We can do it by email. Haha, everybody's favorite way of communicating. So the new executive committee may wish to take a look at that document and see if we need to revise the process. But I think,
and we would not have been able to sign on to this because it was supposed to be done on Friday, but because the group I belong to in Zonta, we're members of this coalition, they left it open until we could vote on it. And so that happens so much of the time. If the timing is bad, if we don't get in the beginning of the month, we often lose it. So I think just talk about that, think about that, and see if there are some things. And these are pretty straightforward. So I don't think most of the time it's not a big discussion. And if it was, then we just have to let it go.
Most of them are not complicated. As Lee is saying, I think the challenge is that we're not a nonprofit organization or an organization, right? We're a commission that meets once a month. Our structure is different. All right, so there's a motion on the floor. It's been to sign on to the ERA letter. All in favor? Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, that passes. Thank you, Lee, again, for bringing that forward. And we obviously need to continue to have conversation about how we want to do signing on.
I'll keep sending them to you.
Signing on. We get.
Thank you all. I'll send that in to them.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other requests from the floor? Advocacy items, issues? Okay. Make sure I didn't skip over anything here. That was number 5. New requests on the floor. Oh, we're all the way up to concluding the meeting. Public comments. Anu, did we get any comments from the public on our hot email address that everybody wants to use?
No, just somebody who wanted to know how to watch us in live stream. So they got to hear a lot of procedural things today, but it's always good to know people want to watch our meetings and that we're accessible to the public. And thank you all for those important discussions. And I'm here waiting. I'm happy to have a monthly meeting, but only to see your wonderful faces. So I will just wait until we know what the new structures are. And I want to say just for a second, and I'm realizing that I hope I'll get a minute on an agenda and not just be part of the consent agenda. I just wanted to say thank you to every one of you. The majority of you are volunteers and you put your heart and soul into this. And then people like Director Manuel, who runs the department, puts extra time in for the Gender Equity Commission. And during this holiday time and this unprecedented historical moment, I just I know it's tough and there are lots of tough decisions to make, but you are an amazingly talented, wonderful group of folks. And I thank you all very much for your contributions to this group. And we are 2021. It's going to be a fresh start. You've built a foundation and now you can take some deep breaths and start thinking about the refresh. So thank you all.
Thanks, Anu. All right, our next meeting is scheduled for January 19th, 2021. You have to turn your calendar over digitally or however you do it. Make sure you've got that marked. Sounds like we will meet at 2:30 for a working session for discussion of roles and responsibilities, followed by a public session at 3:30. So we will block off 2 hours on your calendar. We may not use the full second hour, but we'll have that time on your calendar, please. Also, commissioners, please note that we agreed on part 1 of the retreat. So I hope also on your calendars, you've got January 25th at 2 o'clock held if you're taking a look at your January calendars. All right, I think that's all of our business. Can I have a motion to adjourn? Amanda, thank you. We are adjourned. Happy holidays.